All right, guys, this is talking about, just from where we left off in Chapter 2, this is talking about the effects of 9/11 on supply and demand for New York City office space. Pretty simply put, after 9/11, people left New York in droves, right? Office space collapsed. We saw the demand for real estate fall, office space, and if that demand falls, so do prices. Elasticity, very important definition here, guys, is a percent change in one variable from the 1% change in another. In class, we talked about what if the train was free? If the MBTA was free, what would that do to the price of parking? And by classical economic view, that would raise the cost of parking. The equation here, price elasticity of demand, all the elasticity formulas, by the way, here, guys, are very similar. So just keep that in mind. Price elasticity of demand is a percent change in the quantity demanded of a good resulting from a 1% increase in its price. So it's simply put change in quantity over change in price. So again, change in quantity, that's what that triangle Q over Q. Triangle is a economic symbol for change over change in price. Elasticity of supply and demand. So linear demand curve, that is a straight line, is what we see here on the right. Again, reinforcing this idea that demand is downward sloping. Linear demand curve, the price elasticity of a demand curve, not only on the slope of the demand curve, but also on the price and quantity. The elasticity therefore varies along the curve as price and quantity change. Slope is consistent for this linear demand curve. Near the top, because price is high and quantity is small, the elasticity is large in magnitude. The elasticities become smaller as we move down the curve. A practical way to think about this is gasoline, right? You don't care about the price of gasoline in between $2.50 and $4.50 a gallon. There's not a lot of elasticity. But gas prices move to $10, you'll find that the elasticity changes. Inelasticity of demand, sticking with that gas example, in between $2.50 and $4.50, and this is just a hypothetical example, the demand for gasoline is inelastic. Think about like the demand for milk in your cereal. It's kind of inelastic, right? And milk demand for a lot of intents and purposes is pretty inelastic. Principle that consumers will buy as much of a good as they can get at a single price, but for any higher price, the quantity drops to zero. Completely inelastic demand is zero because the quantity demanded is the same no matter what price the elasticity of demand is. So this is actually the gasoline example I used in the last slide is actually more appropriate for this. If we scroll back here, doesn't let us scroll back, that's fine. We'll keep moving. Other elasticities demand, there's the income elasticity of demand. So this is change in quantity demanded over change in income. See how I said the elasticity formulas are very similar? All we're changing here is the denominator. So what is your quantity demanded for filet mignon when your income goes up by 10%, right? That's effectively what the income elasticity of demand is, and you can change that. There's also things, this is covered later, inferior goods. What is your quantity demanded for ramen noodles as your income goes up? Well, that would be a case opposite of filet mignon, that your quantity of ramen demanded would likely drop. Cross elasticity of demand, that's like looking at the cross elasticity demand of hot dog buns and hot dogs. They're fairly correlated in that example. Price elasticity of supply, that's another term, but again, very similar definition here. As I mentioned, percent change in quantity resulting from a 1% increase in price. So again, percent change in quantity resulting from that 1% change in price. We can skip this one. Example from market for wheat. So during recent decades, changes in the wheat market had made implications for both American farmers and U.S. agricultural policy. To understand what happened, let's examine the behavior of these markets. So it's talking about a supply, quantity supplied, 1800 plus 240p. That's the variable P. Demand is 3550 minus 266p. By setting the quantity supplied equal to the number demanded, we can determine the market clearing price for wheat in 1981. So you basically, all you're doing here, guys, is solving for P, making the two equations equal, solving for P. Substituting into the supply curve equation, we get 1800 plus 240 multiplied by 3.46 equals 2630 would be the clearing price. We use the demand curve to find the price elasticity of the demand. So change in quantity over change in price, 3.46 divided by 2630 multiplied by negative 266, we get negative 0.35. Thus, the demand is inelastic. If you see elasticity with a negative number, that means inelastic. We can likewise calculate the price elasticity of supply, and we see here that price elasticity of supply is slightly positive. Suppose a drought caused the supply curve to shift far enough to the left to push the price to 4. In this case, the quantity demanded would fall to 3550 minus 266 multiplied by 4. That new number there for the market clearing price is 2486. And then again, you can calculate that at that quantity and price. The elasticity of demand would be negative 0.43. The real point here, guys, is that these numbers change with price. And again, like cigarette smokers at $10 a pack, demand's inelastic. I don't need to tell you that from an equation. But if you raise the price to $50 overnight, you'll see elasticity. Continuing on this wheat conversation, we see those supply and demand calculations there. The market clearing price and quantity are solved for P, 1450 plus 115p equals 2900 minus 125p. We're going to get 2150 million bushels there. Then says dry weather and heavy rains combined with increased export demand cause the price to rise. And again, the price elasticity is negative 0.35. This is just a chart on the price of wheat fluctuations. Actually, the chart you see here looks pretty similar to the start of the year. 6 months ago, 3 months ago, wheat prices were really high at the height and beginning of the Ukraine crisis. Now we've seen them kind of normalize. Short run versus long run. In the short run, an increase in price has only a small effect on quantity of gasoline demanded. Motorists may drive less, but they will not change the kind of cars they are driving. In the long run, what this example is going to tell us is that in the long run, we switch to electric cars. If gas gets too expensive, we switch. Just like when gas is cheap, we all buy gas-guzzling SUVs. In the long run, we can change stuff. Automobiles and short-run demand curves. So the opposite is true from automobile demand. If price increases, consumers initially defer buying cars, thus quantity demanded falls. In the long run, however, old cars will wear out and new cars must be purchased. So demand, therefore, is less elastic in the long run than in the short run. Income elasticities also differ from short run to long run. For most goods and revenues, food, beverages, entertainment, the income elasticity of demand is larger in the long run than it is in the short run. For durable goods, the opposite is true. The short run income elasticity of demand is much higher than the long run elasticity. Talking about cyclical industries, cyclical industries are like the industry for selling a boat or RVs, something that moves like, hey, when the economy's doing great, they are, but when the economy is not, they aren't. It is just showing the volatility in that cyclical industries category. Consumption of durable goods versus non-durable. So durable goods are like cars, washing machines, airplanes. Non-durable goods are more service oriented, or food, clothing, services. Because the stock of durables is large compared to the annual demand, short-run demand elasticities are larger than long-run elasticities. Like capital equipment, industries that produce consumer durables are cyclical. This is not true for non-durables. So this is just another example that we've discussed around gasoline demand. Next here, short run and long run supply curves, supply versus durability. So like most goods, the supply of primary copper is more elastic in the long run because in the short run, we can't change the amount of mines that are available. If you need copper, you need to buy it. But in the long run, we can build new mines, is effectively what this is saying here. Again, short run and long run supply curves. If price increases, so if you see a business and they're absolutely killing it, maybe like microchips because of cryptocurrency mining, you know what happened? The price of chips skyrocketed. But eventually, what happened is everyone starts building new chips, supply hits the market, prices fall, right? Once supply is coming to market. Because what will happen eventually is if everyone sees you making all this money, they'll enter your business and they'll add supply too. This is also, oddly, even though this is an older slide, very relevant to today. There's been some weather disruption in Brazil. History repeats itself, and lower supply of coffee beans. We'll still all drink coffee, but that just means generally could be more expensive. So when droughts or freezes damage Brazil's coffee, coffee prices can skyrocket. Supply and demand curve for coffee. Coffee, relatively inelastic, right? If you know anyone who drinks coffee, they need it in the morning, right? They might be able to substitute it with a Red Bull or something, but generally, demand for coffee is pretty inelastic. So what will people do? As long as prices don't go outrageous, they'll continue to consume it. Uh, Linear supply and demand curves provide convenient tools for analysis, but the real world tends not to be like this and perfectly these curves. We can calculate parameters for these numbers, and these lines can shift, which we'll see in some upcoming slides. We can skip this one. Behavior of copper prices. So after reaching about $1 a pound in 1980, the price of copper fell by 40% over the next 4 years. When the global economy is doing poorly, copper prices end up doing poorly. When the global economy is good, copper prices skyrocket. You can also have that in a nuanced way too. So right now, I think the U.S. economy is relatively good, but the global economy is relatively weak. So that means the US at this point in time is actually benefiting from low copper prices. Here's the long-term price chart of copper. That big spike in prices was the great financial crisis. Interestingly enough, the copper prices in 2008 were so high and the economy was so bad, criminals would steal the copper wires out of people's homes, just rip them out and sell them for scrap and make good money being a criminal doing that. So once prices get too high, that can also have like perverse effects on the market and stuff as well. Copper supply and demand. The shift in the demand curve corresponding to a 20% decline in demand leads to a 10.7% change in price. So what they're doing there is they're just making a calculation based on typical elasticity for copper and saying, hey, the price changed by this. What does that do to the quantity? Or the quantity changed by this. What does it do to the price? Upheaval in the oil market. Oil, we've seen this price chart, peaked in 2014 and then basically collapsed for the next 8 years, right? And now we're in a trend where it seems to be going the other way. Oil continues to trend higher. Continue to talk about oil. Talks about 2009 to 2011, oil was 80 a barrel. That was very expensive even for them. And in reality, adjusted for inflation, oil prices would be about $7 a gallon in today's dollars. So while a lot of people last couple of years have, last year or so have complained about high gas, it still hasn't reached the peak that we saw in 2009 through 2011 once you adjusted for inflation. Another fun fact about the oil market and gas is that the other thing that's not calculated is like miles per gallon are way better. So even if gas prices are higher, gas prices would have to be close to like $9 or $10 a gallon for it to actually have the same exact feeling as it did in 2008. Impact of Saudi production. So Saudi, they're the dominant player in the oil market. They bring on a ton of supply to the world. They're also they produce at a very cheap cost. You'll remember from the in-class slides that if you can produce at a cheap cost, you'll add more. Kind of like the examples of if you are a restaurant and you don't have to pay you only have to pay the waitress $2 an hour, you'll staff more. But if you have to pay the waitress 25 an hour, you'll be more careful with his or her time. Effects of price controls. Price controls generally don't work. That's the short answer here. Why don't price controls work? Price controls work because there's black markets. People, if you allow people to buy it at a lower price, what will they do? They'll buy more than they should. In where there's rent control, what happens in rent control? You have a fixed price in your rent that can't go up. What ends up happening is that people will stay in the apartment for longer than they should. They won't want to move. They'll give up job opportunities because the landlord isn't getting a market price. Landlords will then underinvest in that real estate because why are they going to like refinish the kitchen and the bathroom if they're getting below market rent for that? So that's an example of when price controls are in action and don't work. Talking about a natural gas shortage. One thing they're doing in the UK is, that they're going to give people like checks for their energy bill. So that's not a price cap here, but it's almost like giving the consumer something extra to make up for that gas shortage, right? Which is basically just going to increase the price. Now, classic economics would say the fact that Great Britain is going to do that will probably mean that some aspect of inflation will remain higher because you're taking money that should have been paid for the energy and you're putting it back in their pocket at the expense of the taxpayer. This is just showing another quantity demanded, quantity supplied equation here. Again, you would solve for P in this example. Don't worry, I won't make you do that. And that's the end of these slides. I'll post these now, and I'll see you guys on Thursday. Hope you enjoyed this presentation as much as you can enjoy an economics lesson. Thanks.